Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, Israel is shifting gears.
The intense phase of the fighting against Hamas is about to end.
But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says troops would soon be deployed to the northern border with Lebanon. So what is on Israel's agenda? I'm Natasha Del Toro, and this is The Take. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sat down for an interview with Israel's Channel 14, a right-wing television outlet, on Sunday. It was his first interview since October 7th. He was addressing his base and the audience, and those watching him at home. And he made news. The war in Gaza, he said, is about to enter a new phase.
It doesn't mean that the war is about to end, but the war in its intense phase is about to end in Rafah.
What Netanyahu has categorically said is that the Israeli Defense Forces will stay inside Gaza. The war will continue.
Joining me is Daniel Levy.
I'm joining you from London, president of the US Middle East Project, and former Israeli negotiating peace talks with the Palestinians way back.
We're so happy to have you here with us today to talk about all of this. Tell me, Daniel, how do you read what Netanyahu is saying? I mean, does this sound like the end of this phase of fighting in Gaza to you?
He has said it will not take place at the intensity it has taken place in the last months, but the military will remain, military operations will be conducted, and under those circumstances, one might hope that humanitarian aid will be allowed in, that situation at least might improve, but I don't think there's any guarantee that that will be the case.
So at the same time, you have Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant meeting with U.S. officials in D.C. this week, and the war on Gaza was at the heart of those meetings. Netanyahu said in his interview with Channel 14 that he's open to a partial deal with Hamas.
I am not willing to stop the war and leave Hamas intact. I'm prepared to make a partial deal, this is no secret, that will return to us some of the people. But we are committed to continuing the war after a pause in order to complete the goal of eliminating Hamas.
So then where does the proposal stand now?
Well, precisely. Prime Minister Netanyahu, Channel 14, says, we'll take some of our hostages, we'll have a partial deal. The Americans apparently are not happy with the way he framed that. Netanyahu, apparently in response to that, then offers what the Americans have said, oh yes, that's a good clarification, in the Knesset, from the podium of Israel's parliament. And this is what he said: we are committed to the Israeli proposal, which President Biden has welcomed. And second, he says, which does not contradict that we will not end the war until we eliminate Hamas.
We will not end the war until we eliminate Hamas and until we return the residents of the South and the North safely to their homes.
Now, what President Biden set out on May 31, the purported breakthrough offered by the Biden speech and the plan which was attributed to Israel, is that phase one of a period of calm moves on to a second phase, which is a permanent cessation, a sustainable calm, in which not only are all the remaining living hostages released, but in which there is a permanent ceasefire and an Israeli withdrawal.
It's time to begin this new stage. For the hostages to come home, for Israel to be secure, for the suffering to stop. It's time for this war to end.
Now, Netanyahu has made absolutely clear that none of that is on the table, is under consideration at all by Israel. Without that, we're back where we've always been, which is this clash between a Hamas position which says permanent ceasefire, an Israeli position which says we can have some hostages back and then we carry on with the war, with the devastation and destruction. And America yet again has taken a pass on clarifying that And apparently we are supposed to believe that the only problem is Hamas. Netanyahu has made clear his position, which directly contradicts what is supposedly at the center of this plan for a deal.
And, there's this dispute then that continues to simmer between Netanyahu and the Biden administration. And the most recent problem in Netanyahu's eyes is that weapons shipments are being withheld, weapons that are to be used in Gaza.
There are new signs of the Biden administration's deep frustration right now with the Israeli Prime Minister. An envoy for the president told Benjamin Netanyahu that the new video of Netanyahu saying the U.S. was withholding military aid to Israel was, quote, unproductive and completely untrue.
How does what Netanyahu is saying now play into their relationship and ultimately what's happening in Gaza?
So I think it's important to be very clear. Israel could not be doing what it has been doing, could not be now almost 9 months into this kind of a military assault, the kind of ordnance, the kind of weaponry, the kind of bombs that have been used, were it not for a constant conveyor belt of American weapons, munitions, military materiel flowing to Israel, including giving Israel to access to weaponry that is held by the US in the region. There was an interview in which President Biden said that one particular shipment was being delayed while clarifications were requested from the Israeli side. Netanyahu has claimed that that was not the only shipment that has been delayed. And he suggested, and he made that clear also in the Channel 14 interview in Israel, that by going public, he was doing this to break the logjam, to break this slowing, and to make sure that the weapons would flow.
4 months ago, there was a dramatic decrease in the munitions coming to Israel from the US. For long weeks, we turned to our American friends and requested that the shipments be expedited. We did this time and again, at the highest levels and at all levels.
From what we understand, most of the weaponry is being sent. It may be that not just this one shipment, some additional was held back, not sufficient to have really changed the Israeli military calculation, which the Americans could do should they choose. Now, what Netanyahu has basically said here is, I dare you, now that I'm going public, I dare you, Biden administration, to own withholding our weapons. Let's see who blinks first. And the Biden administration not only blinked first, they rushed to show how frequently and how much they were willing to adhere to whatever blinking the Israelis were asking for, because the administration spokespeople said, we don't know what you're talking about. So they clearly thought that the best way to handle this was to make sure that they're saying the weapons will come. Now, there is an argument, and I think it's important to point it out, Natasha. Some people would make the argument that if Hezbollah especially, and others, got the impression that this tension exists between Israel and the US, and that Israel therefore could face a problem with weapons and a weakness there, that this would embolden those actors, and therefore the correct policy thing to do is to demonstrate no clear blue water and that the weapons will flow. The counter-argument is that if Netanyahu is assured that he has the weapons, not only will he continue to do his worst, but also that it's the Israeli side that will be emboldened when it comes to the threats to ratchet up and have a larger scale escalation and perhaps an all-out confrontation on the Israel-Hezbollah front. Now you could say, well, those both sound reasonable, until you plug the key variable here, which is that everybody has been quite convinced that neither Iran nor Hezbollah seek an escalation, and that the wild card here is Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli decision-making system. And once you plug that in, one sees just how dangerous and irresponsible the American position yet again is.
Netanyahu turns his focus to the northern border with Lebanon. That's after the break. So, Daniel, Netanyahu signaled in his Sunday interview with Channel 14 that ending what he called the intense phase in Gaza would allow a shift in focus to the northern border with Lebanon.
After the intense phase is finished, we will have the possibility to move part of the forces north, and we will do this, first and foremost, for defensive purposes.
How is that going to influence the tension with Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Okay, so there's a real danger that if either party reaches a conclusion that the other is intending to go all out, full-scale military escalation here, then the other party would decide we need to preempt. So it could encourage that consideration on the Hezbollah side. I don't think we're seeing that yet. The other danger is that as long as the exchanges continue, there is the danger that even though both sides are adhering, even when they're escalating, to a kind of menu of what escalation consists of, something unintentional could happen in terms of what Hezbollah hit or what Israel hits, which leads the other side to then up the ante even further, and one could find oneself in a non-premeditated tilt to all-out war. However, the danger that I think currently has minds focused is that Israel may make a determination that if things are drawing down in Gaza and absent an ability to achieve a political solution it deems acceptable, that it will pursue a military solution. And that seems like it's something under consideration. I would note the following. I don't think the military is convinced that this is the right way to go. I think the military know that they are stretched. Their troops are somewhat exhausted. They have manpower issues. I think one of the things they're trying to do is if you can get the deal in Gaza, you can sound tough with regard to Hezbollah, but actually if you manage to draw down in Gaza, you might get the ceasefire on the northern front and it won't require you to do that. Stacked against that is Netanyahu is actually in the worst political place. Netanyahu has a coalition crisis at the moment, and a Netanyahu with his back up against the wall under these circumstances is very unpredictable and dangerous, and he may try and push this.
Daniel, you spoke about Netanyahu being in one of the weakest moments in terms of his coalition. We have a bit of news that came out this week.
Israel's Supreme Court has ruled that ultra-Orthodox religious men must be drafted into the military there, like just about everyone else. Most Jewish Israeli men and women are required at age 18 to serve in the armed forces, starting at 18 for 2 to 3 years. But ultra-Orthodox communities had been exempted from the rule.
And, this decision could result in ultra-Orthodox lawmakers pulling out of Netanyahu's coalition and collapsing it. What impact would that have on Israel and its military plans in Gaza and at the borders with Lebanon?
The tensions within Netanyahu's ruling coalition are beginning to close in on Netanyahu. You have Ben Gvir, Smotrich, and many inside Netanyahu's own Likud, for whom any stop of war may risk that less Palestinians are killed and that it's harder to displace Palestinians. And that's really not something they like. They want maximum provocation, maximum removal of Palestinians. They are openly eradicationist. You have the ultra-Orthodox. They are actually supportive of the deal. They're not warmongering on Lebanon. I don't want to pretend that these are the great peaceniks in the government. They are not. But they have much higher priorities to provide for their own community, including the funding for their yeshivot, these religious seminaries. They also, therefore, understand that this issue of military conscription becomes much more burning and unpopular when Israel is in a war. So one could make the case, and I would make that case, that they are probably the element in the coalition most keen to see an end to the war. So you have the first sense that there could be dissent within Netanyahu's Likud, that his power there may be waning. He has been remarkably effective at holding his coalition together. If his government is collapsed, you go into an election mode. He will continue to serve as a caretaker government. Under that caretaker government, Netanyahu, should he choose, could do the hostage deal, could do other things. But I'm running ahead of myself because we are not there.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important, as we're having this conversation about the war in Gaza potentially lessening, if not ending, there was a recent study that nearly 21,000 Palestinian children are buried, trapped, detained, or lost as a result of this war. More than 100 Palestinians were killed just on Saturday, which is one of the deadliest days in the war. I feel like we say that all the time. Daniel, we know what these politicians are saying, but where does that leave the people still in Gaza at this point in the war?
Well, precisely. Look, we can have a long chat and I can tell you about the coalition dynamics inside Israel. And the key thing is, what is happening there? How does one put an end to the daily mass civilian killing events? This 21,000 children unaccounted for. Some we know dead, some we don't know their fate, some almost certainly under the rubble. The conditions in which people are being forced to live. Getting that truth out there still. As people move to the summer and some people are watching European football or Copa America and there are elections in Britain and France and the US. And here we are, months in, and none of this has to happen. And it must be stopped. And one must never lose eye contact with that human imperative.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Sarí el-Khalili, Ashish Malhotra, and Sonia Bhagat, with Amy Walters, Mohammed Zain Shafi Khan, Veronique Eshaya, Duha Mosaad, and me, Natasha Del Toro, in for Malika Bilal. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back.